Okay, so unfortunately, my last video was a little too long. I wasn't able to finish out the slideshow. As a review from video 1, or at least like where we left off with video 1, was this idea of a visible spectrum and the fact that the colors that we see when we're looking at objects are those which are reflected back to us. Okay, and we can also have all colors being reflected back or all colors actually being absorbed. How does this connect with this idea of photosynthesis? Well, if we go back to this slide here of how do plants capture light energy? Well, they have light capturing pigments called chlorophyll, which are found in the thylakoids of chloroplasts. And actually this chlorophyll, depending on what type of chlorophyll it is, it does capture light by absorbing it, but it only absorbs certain wavelengths of light and others get reflected back. Okay, so what's neat is actually to take this a step further and focus a little bit more on that absorption versus reflecting aspect of those wavelengths of light, is to look at this question of why are plants green? Okay, so we have chlorophyll as being one of those light capturing pigments, again, that absorb or reflect certain wavelengths of light. The two main types of light capturing pigments in plants that we talk about are chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. And we can see these in this graph here. We have chlorophyll B in the yellow and chlorophyll A in the red. Right here we have carotenoids. So that is one of those accessory pigments we talked about in video 1. I didn't go into depth, I just mentioned accessory pigments. So there are other light capturing pigments that are within plants, but the main two are chlorophyll B and chlorophyll A. So if we actually look at this trend, or these trends, we focus on chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Looking at chlorophyll A, we have wavelength down here, and we have actually the colors of the wavelengths. So this is just like this visible light spectrum that we looked at. Okay, so we have wavelength versus percentage of light absorbed. So if we look at chlorophyll A from this graph, we can see that our violet colors, a good amount of the violet wavelength is actually absorbed by chlorophyll A. And then if we follow along, actually into our orange and red wavelengths, a high percentage of those are absorbed as well. So if we think of the colors that are being absorbed as those colors that we are not going to see, we're not really going to see in plants a violet color or an orange and red color. Okay, instead we're going to see what's reflected back. So chlorophyll A, that'll allow blue and greens, and maybe even kind of into the yellow. There's very low absorption of those wavelengths. So that's the color that's going to actually reflect back to our eyes. Now with chlorophyll B, we can see that there is a high amount, an extremely high amount of blue light, or blue wavelengths, sorry, that are absorbed. And even into like our orange wavelengths, orange and red, those are going to be absorbed as well. So here we have what's being reflected is mostly green. That's the lowest absorption for both chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. We have a little bit of yellow being absorbed by both chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. So what's really going to be reflected back to us is this green color. So why are plants green? Well, that's because that's the color, or that's the wavelength that isn't actually being absorbed by our light capturing pigments. Instead, those are going to be reflected back or reflected out. So that's what our eyes are going to see, is that green color. Because all the other wavelengths from the sunlight, because sunlight actually includes all of our Roy G. Biv colors. Sunlight, all those wavelengths are going from the sunlight to the plant, and green is what's being reflected out back to us. So that's why plants are green. This always brings the question with it of, well, what happens then when we get into our fall weather? Because our green leaves for our trees, they actually start turning colors, and we get some reds, oranges, and yellows even with our tree leaves. Now, the reasoning for that is because colder weather means that we have fewer hours of sunlight. Okay, so with less sunlight, the trees are not able to perform as much photosynthesis. Photosynthesis itself takes energy to run, and if our trees are not able to actually go through photosynthesis as much because there's less sunlight, then it really turns into an energy drain. So what do trees do instead? Well, they actually break down the chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll becomes degraded. The tree actually recycles all of the molecules that are within the chlorophyll and within the chloroplast. But chlorophyll during the fall time actually becomes degraded. They break it down, and with that breakdown, we're not able to absorb these wavelengths as well as we were before. Okay, so that's why we have this difference in color, is because the chlorophyll becomes degraded. It can't absorb the wavelengths like it typically would, so we have other colors that end up reflecting back to us. So, I mean, that's just a little bit of a fun tidbit to throw in there, since, we are in the middle of fall right now. Some of you might have questions as well as to, well, how comes we do see some other colors when it comes to other plants? Well, that's because of the types of actual light capturing pigments that are within these other plants. So if you think of something like maybe an eggplant, that's going to have a different pigment inside of it. So what we're going to be seeing with an eggplant is this violet color. So that's going to end up being what's being reflected back to us. So it all depends on the type of light capturing pigment that is used within each plant. If we look at this accessory pigment here, carotenoids. Well, those are actually found in carrots. And carotenoids, as you can see, we have absorption of violet, blue, and even green wavelengths. Well, carrots are typically orange. We see, I mean, it's kind of hard to see, but there's really no, because it stops right here, there's really no absorption along this end of yellow, orange, and red. So what's the color that we end up seeing? It's going to be this orangish color, because that's what's being reflected back. It's not being absorbed by the carotenoids. Okay, hopefully that helps and actually adds to this understanding of photosynthesis. Let me know if you guys have any questions.